go to open the hatch.
EV1 functional. EV2 functional.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here at the NASA Johnson Space Center. Today is May 8th, 2018. Today we're going to be talking about two upcoming spacewalks that we have this month and next, starting with the first on May 16th next week. That's to work on some pump flow control subassemblies that monitor the space station's cooling. And then in June 14th, actually, we're going to be focusing on one for installing HD cameras looking towards commercial crew and also expanding the external wireless capability aboard the International Space Station. So before we get started here, let's take a look at some of the crew members that are aboard the International Space Station prepared to do the spacewalk and help out from the inside.
Heading out the hatch for both upcoming excursions are NASA astronauts Drew Feustel and Ricky Arnold, two veteran spacewalkers. Spacewalker pairs are assigned either EV1 or EV2. Drew Feustel will perform the first as EV1, wearing the suit with red stripes. This will be the 8th and 9th in his career. His first 6 were performed on his 2 shuttle missions, 3 on STS-125 in 2009, the 5th and final Hubble servicing mission, and another 3 on STS-134 in 2011. The mission that delivered the Alpha magnetic spectrometer to the station. His most recent spacewalk was on his current spaceflight, Expedition 55. Altogether, his career spacewalking time adds up to 48 hours and 28 minutes. For Arnold, he'll be EV2 for the first spacewalk. This will be the 4th and 5th in his career, his first 2 on STS-119, which delivered the final set of solar arrays to the space station, and his most recent also on Expedition 55, the same excursion as Feustel. Arnold has 18 hours and 44 minutes of total spacewalking time in his career. This will be the 210th and 211th spacewalk in support of assembly, maintenance, and upgrades for the International Space Station. Inside the orbiting laboratory, Norishige Kanai will take point on helping the duo suit up in the Quest airlock. Scott Tingle will help with those final steps before they head out the hatch. Tingle will lead Canadarm2 operations, backed up by Kanai.
Of course, now we're looking at another spacewalk being pushed to June 14th. For that one, there'll be some new crew aboard the International Space Station. Serena Anand Chancellor will be taking the lead, suiting up the crew, and space station robotics officer as well. So with me, I'm not going to be talking about the spacewalk. I have a panel of experts who are going to give us everything we need to know about these upcoming tasks, starting to my right with Mr. Kenny Todd.
Well, good afternoon. Let's see, Kenny Todd. I'm the head of mission integration and ops integration manager, excuse me. I went back to an old title. Anyway, this is my 33rd year of human space flight, 27 years working for NASA, and about 23 years in the space station program. So again, it's certainly been a highlight of my career watching the station being built, assembled, and for the last 5 years, again, I've been in charge of day-to-day operations on the space station program. So anyway, happy to be here and ready to talk about this spacewalk.
Thank you, sir. All right, Mr. Anthony Varia.
Yeah, I'm Anthony Varia. I'm the lead flight director for these upcoming EVAs 50 and 51. I've been doing human spaceflight operations, or at least been with human spaceflight since 2004, and have been doing work on the International Space Station, the ops world, since about 2007.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's move on to our spacewalking officers for each EVA.
Hi, I'm Jordan Lindsay. I'm the lead spacewalk officer for EVA 50. I've been in manned space flights for 13 years now. Been here at JSC for 13 years, working in both robotics and EVA.
Okay, and last but not least.
I'm Keith Johnson, and I've been at the Johnson Space Center for almost 30 years. I've been in EVA for about 29 of those years. This will be my 25th EVA as an EVA officer, so I've done quite a few of them. I'm hoping to get this one right. It'll be fun working on this with Anthony.
Thank you. Very, very excited to looking forward to the tasks that we're going to be doing and kind of going over these spacewalks in detail. So for those in the room, we're going to be taking Ask NASA questions and also be asking some questions live. So if you think of any, feel free, and we'll go around the room here. If you're following along on social media, We're using the hashtag AskNASA, so make sure to ask those questions live, and we'll read them here to our experts. For the phone bridge, you can press *1 to ask a question. If you realize it's already been asked or answered, just press *2 to cancel it. And with that, we'll move forward, starting with Mr. Kenny Todd, if you have some words about the perspective of the International Space Station program.
You bet. Thanks, Gary. So anyway, good afternoon again. And it's great to be here with you. It seemed like we were just here yesterday, but since then we've done a couple of spacewalks, some other significant things on orbit. Probably the most significant thing is we just completed the SpaceX 14 mission. Happy to report that the Dragon landed safely out in the Pacific on Saturday afternoon, and even more glad to report that the Dragon arrived back in port yesterday morning, and all that cargo has since been turned over. And probably most importantly, there's a lot of critical science on that particular flight that quite literally is going around the world. When you look at the samples that we took for the different principal investigators around the world, it's very exciting to be part of this whole program and be able to see so many people from around the world excited about the things we're doing. As far as where we are going forward, I think we're getting into what I call the last throes of the increment 55, and we got about 3 weeks left with Maker and Nemo and Anton, so we're in a bit of the home stretch here, but we're not taking too much time off to rest on the laurels of what's going on the rest of the increment. We still have the spacewalk we're going to do next week on the 16th. And then shortly after that, the following Sunday, the orbital Cygnus module will launch and be on its way to the space station. It will arrive on the 24th, and at that point then we've got some time critical science, and so we'll be getting into that module as quick as we possibly can, and we'll effectively spend the rest of the increment trying to get that science up and running and get that mission on its way. So we're very excited about the last 3 weeks of the mission. As usual, the last week we'll start integrating a lot of return type operations for Maker and Nemo, and as they get ready to come home and do a lot of work on the Russian segment, getting their suits prepped and getting their fit checks done and all that. So anyway, we'll be phasing that into the near term plan here over the next week or two. Once we get to the end of the increment, then we'll have a very short, what we call an indirect handover period, where we'll only have 3 crew members on board the space station, and on June the 6th, we'll see the launch of the next crew, as Gary said, with Alexander and Serena and Sergey. So we're excited about those guys coming on board. It's a fairly quick and fairly short indirect period, which means we can get back and running up on 6 crew ops very quick on the 8th of June. So we'll be ready to pick up and keep moving ahead with the Cygnus mission at that point. So as most of you may remember, back in the time frame when we talked about the last set of EVAs, we talked about doing a double in this particular time frame. We were going to do an EVA on the 16th, and then we were also going to do another one on the 30th. And that allows us, when we can do these EVAs this close, to be able to take advantage of some of the maintenance operations on the suits, save some crew time if we're able to do the EVAs kind of what we refer to kind of back to back. And so that was our plan going in. And so we had that EVA scheduled on the 30th before the end of the increment. But as we started to get more and more of the science requirements defined for the Cygnus mission and a better understanding of the timelines to get those activities in work so that we could start collecting the science data, it became clear that we were really quickly surpassing the amount of crew time that we had before the end of the increment to do both an EVA and get some of the critical science going. So we took a hard look at it. We didn't really like the crew work rest cycle leading up to the EVA itself, and so we made the decision to take the EVA, move it out a couple of weeks. We'll pay a little bit of hit in terms of the crew time because we'll have to do some additional maintenance on the suits as part of your standard care and feeding for the suits before and after an EVA, and that's okay. We can handle that, and we thought that was in the best interest of everybody to make sure that we didn't try to cram too much in here right here at the end of the increment. So that's why the plans changed a little bit, and we'll look forward to getting this EVA done on the 16th, and then, as you said, we'll pick up the second EVA on the 14th of June. So everything's looking good on that front. As far as the EVAs themselves, they're coming together very well. The gentleman to my right will talk to you a lot about what's going on there, but at a high level, on the first EVA, we've got a couple of pumps that we need to basically swap locations. There is a pump that failed probably 5 years ago now that I think about it. And we replaced it at the time. We put it in what I would call a very strategically advantageous position on station. And that pump doesn't provide us any functionality at this point. It's not a viable spare. And so what we want to do is we want to take one of our good spares, go put it in that location, take this bad pump, move it to a location where we don't need to access robotically. So when we get this spare put where it needs to be, then we'll have it available to us if we should encounter a failure and we would need to do a robotic operation. That spare would be available to us. So that'll be a large part of what we're going to do. In addition to that, we have some camera work to do. It seems like every EVA we go out these days, we're doing something with cameras, and that's good because we're seeing a lot of good video with these external high definition cameras, and we want to continue to try to keep those functional and continuing to provide good insight as to the overall health of the station, and including some magnificent views as well. So we're continuing to work on that. In addition to that, we have a common tracking box that we also need to replace. It allows us to recover some redundancy in the KU system, and again, that's just part of good systems management. If we have a problem, we try to address it early so it doesn't become a bigger problem. So again, just getting us back up to a fully redundant capability on the KU strings. That'll take care of the first EVA. The second EVA in June, we'll do a little bit more in terms of trying to continue marching down the road to get ready for the commercial crew vehicles when they arrive. We've got some pretty significant camera work that we're going to do, adding some cameras to the front of Node 2. And again, that will allow us a little better insight into the approaching vehicles, and give us the opportunity to be able to collect some data as they're on the way in. So again, this is just part of us continuing to move towards that next set of vehicles that are going to help us service the space station. In addition to that, there's a payload that has failed several months ago. It needs to be handled from a door standpoint. It's got a door that's stuck open, and these guys have figured out a plan to go out there and try to close that door so that we are able to get it in a disposal vehicle later on down the road. And so anyway, a lot going on in these EVAs, a lot of different things, but everything's looking good so far. Suits, we're just really getting into that part of the workload, and they can talk to you about it, of what we're doing with suits and preparations, and everything's going good at this point. And we'll do a mission management team meeting on Tuesday morning. I don't see any issues with B&Go coming out of there, and we'll give it to the ops team to go execute. And at this point, things are looking really positive. So
incredible. Yeah, there's a lot of work up front and planning for very, very far in the future. So we're definitely at a good place right now. So Mr. Anthony Berry, if you want to talk about where we are in the preparations that have led us to this point.
Oh, sure. So there's a lot of different moving parts to an EVA in terms of the ground team readiness, in terms of getting the suits ready, and all of those different lines are all heading towards next Wednesday to get started and get ready for EVA 50. So just yesterday we had Drew and Ricky check out their suits, get in them, make sure that being on orbit a few months will stretch out your spine, make you be of a little bit different shape than you went up. And so we want to make sure that we account for that in the suit sizing. We have the ability to swap things out on the suit to make it longer, shorter, however you need. They're getting the hardware ready. We talked to them just about an hour ago, Jordan and I did, to a standard EVA conference, getting ready for, hey, what do you guys have questions about? We sent up briefing packages. We look at the procedures. What are you guys worried about? and they're all in good spirits, and they're getting ready to go. So it's all about putting the tools together and getting ready to go out the door. In terms of the ground team, all the flight controllers who make all of this possible, we're doing simulations. We had a simulation on Monday of this EVA. It went well, so I have every confidence in the team's ability to do a really good job next Wednesday. And then meanwhile, we're actually doing on-orbit preparation. Kenny alluded to the fact that one of these PFCSs, these pump flow control subassemblies, is in a really nice shelf out on the truss. One of them's in a less easy to access spot on the lab, and we want to swap those out. Well, the first step is you go out with the robotic arm, grab it off of that shelf on P6, the P6 truss, and bring it in. Well, that starts tonight with moving the robotic arm and grabbing that pump, hopefully tomorrow night, to serve it up to the crew and get it ready for next Wednesday's operations. And so all of that's coming together to put us in a good place to go out the door on Wednesday morning, which we're real excited about. And then, of course, once that EVA is complete, we'll be looking ahead to EVA 51 in June, as we are getting all of the hardware, pretty much all of the hardware that is going out the door on that EVA, up on that Cygnus flight that Kenny was talking about. So we are going to wait to have the crew unpack that science and start the good science that's coming up on OA9, and then we will go in and grab those tools and stanchions and cameras that are going to go out on EVA 51 and get those ready for our mid-June date.
All right, yeah, a lot to look forward to, and it seems like, again, we're in a very good spot. It seems like the Cygnus arrival was pretty tight to that May 30th date, so this will give us a nice buffer. So with that, we'll look at EVA 50 specifically. So Jordan, if you want to talk about from a very high level, just kind of what we're doing before we get into the nitty-gritty.
Sure, yeah, the big thing that's been alluded to so far is the pump flow control subassembly needing to be swapped out. Got a lot of really good help from the robotics team, just like Anthony alluded to, that's going to be starting up later tonight to be able to get that PFCS in a good location for us. So that's the main objective for our EVA for this one next week, being able to get those PFCS swapped between some robotics equipment and the ESP1 location, which is on the lab. After that, depending on how much time we have available, we do have, just like Kenny talked about, being able to get some new cameras outside. So we have a camera R&R planned, as well as a comm box that we have there in SGTRC that will be part of the EVA as well. So with that, if you guys are good, we'll go ahead and take a look at the detailed animation.
Let's do it.
EV1 Drew will egress the airlock first, set up safety tethers, followed by EV2 Ricky with the crew lock bag. Ricky will start the translation by going up the CETA spur, the crew equipment translation aid, up to face 1 and port on the vehicle over to the external stowage platform 1, or ESP1, where the PFCS is currently located. At the worksite, Ricky will temp stow the crew lock bag. While this is going on, Drew will start his translation from the airlock via the nadir route on the vehicle over to the same ESP1 location. Once Drew arrives, he will start to configure the APFR, or Articulating Portable Foot Restraint, for later ingress and use. Ricky will start to set up the worksite by setting up the MUT end effector ball stack assembly, or MUT ball stack assembly, for a temporary stowage platform later. Drew will then work to remove the multi-layer insulation, or MLI, to expose the pump flow control subassembly. While Drew is doing this, Ricky will retrieve the gap spanner and install between two sets of handrails. This will aid in the translation later. Drew will then retrieve the S0 jumper stowed during US EVA 49 and begin to route, and then will mate this particular jumper onto the flight support equipment, or FSE. With the jumper routed, Ricky will then ingress the APFR, install two scoops. These are handling aids that will make the moving of the PFCS easier. Ricky will close the fluid quick disconnects. This will allow Drew to open the fluid QD bail. Ricky will then grab two scoops, one for himself and one for Drew, and the crew will then make their way out to the Special Purpose Dexterous Manipulator, SPDM, Enhanced ORU Temporary Platform, EOTP, where the spare PFCS is currently located. Once Drew arrives, he will install a scoop and then release the single bolt that is holding the degraded PFCS in location. Once the PFCS has been removed, he will present that to Ricky, who will also install a scoop that will aid in the translation of the failed PFCS over to the temporary stowage location. The crew will then return to the stowage location and temp stow the degraded unit here on the ball stack assembly. Drew will then ingress the APFR and begin to release the 2 bolts that are holding the spare PFCS in location. He will extract the PFCS and present it to Ricky, who will photo document and inspect the bottom side of the PFCS. The crew will then work together to move the PFCS from the ESP1 back out to the EOTP. Ricky will remove the scoop, and the crew will work together to stow the PFCS and drive a single bolt. Drew will then remove the single scoop, and the crew will make their way back to the ESP1 worksite. Drew will ingress the APFR, and Ricky will begin to remove the degraded PFCS from the temporary stowage location and pass that to Drew. The crew will work together to install the PFCS, removing scoops and replacing the MLI. The crew will then reconfigure the APFR. Ricky will retrieve the APFR and begin his translation to the S0 location to begin work with the robotic arm. At the S0 truss, Ricky will allow the robotic arm to come into the worksite, where he will perform a safety tether swap and install the APFR onto the latching end effector. Once the APFR is installed, Ricky will ingress the APFR and via the robotic operator will fly to the camera port 13 worksite. While that is going on, Drew will continue to clean up the worksite at ESP1, retrieving all tools and tethers and stowing them inside the crew lock bag. He will retrieve the crew lock bag, as well as the WIF extender, or the worksite interface extender. Drew will then start his translation via the NATO route back to the airlock, where he will stow the WIF extender on the equipment lock. Once the WIF extender is stowed, he will retrieve the crew lock bag, temp stow it in the airlock, and retrieve the spare camera group and make his way out to the camera port 13 worksite where Ricky has been working. Ricky will receive a scoop from Drew to install onto the degraded camera group. Once the scoop is installed, the crew will work together to temporarily stow the degraded unit on the lab. Once the camera group is temp stowed, Drew will hand off the ORU, or on-orbit replaceable unit bag, that has the spare camera group in it to Ricky, retrieve the degraded camera group unit, and make his way back to the airlock, where he will temp stow the degraded unit and retrieve the spare space-to-ground transmitter receiver controller and make his way over to the Z1 location. Ricky will then install the spare camera group into camera port 13 and via the robotic operator go back to the S0 truss, where he will deconfigure his tether, egress the APFR, and temp stow the ORU bag. Once the ORU bag is temp stowed, Ricky will grab the APFR, retrieve it from the latching end effector, and make his way port to the Crew Equipment Translation Aid, or CETA cart, where he will stow the APFR for later use on an upcoming EVA. Once the APFR is stowed, Ricky will make his way back toward S0, where he will pick up his ORU bag, and then make his way back to the airlock. While this has been going on, Drew has been working to set up the Z1 SGTRC worksite, installing a ball stack and mud end effector, configuring the ORU bag into an appropriate location, retrieving the spare SGTRC, and putting it into a conducive worksite. Drew will then make his way to the forward side of Z1 and remove the degraded SGTRC and temp stow it near the ORU bag. He will then retrieve the spare SGTRC and install into this location. Once the install is complete, Drew will start the cleanup of this worksite, stowing the failed unit inside the ORU bag and retrieving all tools and tethers used at this worksite. Once Drew has retrieved the ORU bag, he will make his way back to the airlock for ingress. Ricky will start the ingress, opening the thermal cover. Drew will then hand him the ORU bag, ingress, and that will be the end of EVA 50.
So a lot of acronyms and a lot of work being done. I'm glad we can actually get a professional voiceover for that one too. That was pretty good. But there's the main purpose was focusing on these pump flow control subassemblies among the many other tasks that are a part of this. But there's a larger story to this, right? We're swapping off, we're getting a spare and putting it in a new location, but there's more work that went behind that. So Anthony, what's the story there?
Yeah, so the purpose of a PFCS, pump flow control subassembly, it's all about the cooling of the batteries that the space station holds its electrical power in. We got the 8 big solar arrays you've seen on the space station. Each of those has some batteries. We need to keep batteries cool, just like in your cell phone. We do that with an ammonia cooling loop. We've got a radiator, pumps the ammonia through the radiator, out through the batteries, cools them off. And so many years ago, a spare pump was launched to be on the side of the lab. And then back in the year like 2000, 2001, this pump lost its power due to a power failure on station. And that power was not recovered for, I think, a few months. As a result, the worry is that that pump got a little bit cold, and therefore, henceforth, it was named Frosty. And so you'll hear the term Frosty used probably on the space-to-ground loops during the EVA as far as what we call this thing. We are going to swap Frosty out to the shelf out on P6, where that nice, convenient spare site that Kenny was talking about, so we can plug it in, we can actually get data from it, and we can power it and make sure that it is indeed a healthy pump. And that tells us, do we have a good spare there or not? But this is one of many PFCSs that we've got on station. We are swapping it out with a PFCS that was a source of a large overboard leak about 5 years ago this week, actually. And that leak of ammonia overboard out on the P6 truss, that was, I think Chris Hadfield was the one who called that one down. That led to an EVA that was turned around in about 48 hours. So we saw the leak, we got the call down, and we were out the door the next day, or a day and a half later. And in fact, that's the video of that ammonia coming out of the P6 work site. And so henceforth, that PFCS was known as leaky, oddly enough, appropriately enough, and we swapped that one out with a spare that was already out on the P6 site. We've also got Trippy. That is a spare we just downmassed, or we re-entered on SpaceX 14. That was a pump that had an electrical fault in it, and it tripped. It had a trip of its electrical equipment, and so it is trippy. And then finally, Motley. Motley is a new pump that came up on SpaceX CRS-14, and it's installed in that convenient shelf that Kenny was talking about earlier. And that is named Motley because it's a collection of some spare parts. It's kind of a motley crew of parts that has been put together to keep that ammonia flowing. So all this EVA, this PFCS swap, is really about getting ourselves best situated so that if a pump were to fail in a spot where we really needed it, where it's actually actively cooling those batteries, we could quickly swap that pump in and keep our cooling going. You know, that pump failure, that leak overboard, you know, we had been monitoring that leak for years. Drew Feustel himself actually went out on STS-134 and topped off that tank because we knew it was leaking slowly. And throughout all of the probably decade we were watching that thing, and we had to go do, you know, that quick turnaround EVA. Throughout all of that, I think we were only down cooling for about maybe 2 days. And so that's a testament to the good design of the space station, of the good ops input into the design of how to best make this thing work and best stay available when failures happen, because we want the space station to be up and running and doing the good science that it's there to do.
Yeah, so it's pretty much setting up the spare parts. So if you, like you said, if something needs to come up and be switched, you know you have the best parts available, and you're testing to make sure that whatever part you put on, that one's actually going to work.
Absolutely.
So looking at, you're talking about these pump flow control assemblies, they're kind of monitoring the ammonia that's going through, and the ammonia is the part that is actually cooling the outside of the station. So what is it about ammonia that sort of helps with all of that?
Ammonia is a coolant, and what do coolants do? They collect, they transport and reject heat. They take in the heat, move it somewhere you don't want the heat, and let it go. In space station, we use radiators to get rid of the heat. The friendliest coolant to work with is water. You know, regular water. You can do this at your house. Put a pot on a stove, boil it, turn off the heat. A few hours later, that pot is probably still going to be pretty warm. Water holds heat really, really well. It has good heat capacity. The problem with water, and the reason you can't use that in all of your cooling systems, is water freezes at 32 degrees F or 0 degrees C. That's a problem for human spaceflight because we operate in an environment that can get much colder than that. And so ammonia, what ammonia buys you is the ability to get a lot colder. Ammonia has a history of being a coolant. Ammonia has been used for refrigeration since the 1850s. If you've had frozen food, that food has probably been in an ammonia chiller. It works really well as a coolant. It has good heat capacity. The problem with ammonia is that it's toxic. And this isn't ammonia we're talking about that cleans glass at your house. That's 10% at best. This is 100% pure anhydrous ammonia, and it is something that we are very respectful of because we don't want that coming inside with us on the suits at the end of the spacewalks.
So it fulfills that necessity, but you're right, you have to kind of monitor the toxicity of it, of course. Now, there's a finite amount of it. As you said, Drew, actually on STS-134, you said actually kind of topped it off. So where is he topping it off? Where's the part where you pour it in?
Oh, okay. Well, so we've got different jumpers that we can utilize to take ammonia from some of our big external thermal control system around the P1 and S1 truss. And actually, we, as part of the design of Space Station, a really good design, the ability to get ammonia out to the ends of the truss by stretching a jumper across the SARS, the solar alpha rotary joint. And jumpers like that are all over station. We have a jumper right here that we're going to be using on our EVA, on EVA 50, to allow ammonia to expand once we disconnect Frosty from its flight support equipment, because we don't want that flight support equipment to get too warm and to therefore exceed its design pressure. Because just like any fluid, water, ammonia, if it gets warm, it's going to increase in pressure, and we want to make sure that we have a path for that ammonia to go out to. Originally, we thought we were going to vent that ammonia overboard. That's kind of a pain. It takes a while. We can do it, but using this jumper, we can actually save a lot of time on the EVA and make things a little bit more friendly for the crew because they're not venting ammonia overboard.
That's right. So Jordan, they're actually going to be working with this on EVA 50. What exactly are they going to be doing? How are they going to be handling the jumper?
Yeah, so with this particular jumper, Drew actually retrieved this on the last EVA, and Tim stowed it at the location. So that actually is a get-ahead for us on this particular EVA. He's going to be removing a cap that goes over the corresponding QD, or quick disconnect, as you can see on either end of this jumper. He's going to connect one end of the jumper and then route it. So it's going to act like an accumulator at the work site. Once we have it routed and we make sure that we close off Frosty, as we've heard the name for the Pfcs, we'll actually open up the valve on this particular jumper, allowing for that expansion that Anthony was talking about to happen inside the jumper itself. So once we have it routed in place, we're going to be using some wire ties, and I think Keith is going to be talking details about wire ties a little bit. We're going to wire tie this in place, and then it's going to be mated and stay in that location until we're done.
All right. So you talked about this as a get-ahead task. Are there a couple more that we can possibly get to over these next two EVAs?
We do have additional tasks that we can get to from a get-ahead perspective, but this particular jumper was actually retrieved on the last EVA. So it was a get-ahead for the last EVA to set us up nicely for this EVA.
All right.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, let's jump ahead to EVA 51. As Keith, if you want to kind of give an overview of that EVA, and then we'll kind of go into the nitty-gritty as we did with Jordan.
Okay, so the good news is we thought we had a quick turnaround in between Jordan's EVA and our EVA, and we would have to get a lot of hardware ready for this EVA out of OA9. We have two booms that we have to assemble. We have a high-definition camera that has to get installed. A handrail has to be put on that. They need to do some internal wiring. So postponing this a couple weeks gives the crew internal time to get this stuff ready when the vehicle gets there. Our EVA, what we're doing is we're taking a power cable and an Ethernet cable. We hook them up outside Space Station, and we route them on a path out to the forward end of the space station. And these cameras are going to be used to view the forward end of the space station for commercial crew docking. but they also form part of an external wireless communication. So they'll be able to talk to the Japanese exposed facility, payloads that'll be out there, and the Columbus module is going to have a big set of experiments that are coming up, and this is out there to provide communication to that. So the crew members will go back and get these booms, and they'll stick them into what we call worksite interfaces. They're little receptacles that are on the front that we put foot restraints in. We're going to use them for these booms, and then we'll hook these cables up to it, and we'll get power and data back and forth between them. When that's done, the crew is going to do another camera port work the way we seem to be doing on all these EVAs. So on what's called camera port 3, that high definition camera isn't working right, so we're going to replace that, and the light is very dim, so we're going to take that off. So we'll put Ricky on the arm to go fly over and do that. And we have a unique opportunity on this EVA to work on a payload that was not meant to be worked on EVA. So when it's called a cloud aerosol transport system. So what it is it's a payload that shoots lasers at clouds, and then it has a telescope that looks at the images that come back. And it has failed, as Kenny said, but it failed with the door open. And the problem is, for this payload to come back home again, they're going to put it in SpaceX 17 trunk. With that door open, they can't put it back in that way. So they've asked the robotic team to go off and look at what closing this door is going to take, and they've asked the EVA team to see if they can get out there and close the door and keep it closed. We're going to send Drew over to work on that payload. And it's on the Japanese exposed facility, so he's way out there on that platform on the nadir side of that thing.
Okay. Well, if you're ready, let's go into the nitty-gritty of that EVA.
That sounds good.
With another professional voiceover.
Ricky Arnold as EV1 will be coming out of the airlock first. He'll retrieve a crew lock bag with an Ethernet cable attached to it. He'll be followed by Drew Feustel, who'll be coming out with a power cable attached to his mini workstation. Ricky will translate around the external stowage platform 2, making his way over to the lab, where he'll translate forward along handrails and drop his green equipment hook tether. From there, he'll translate underneath the lab and node 2, and he'll drop off his crew lock bag, attaching it to handrails at the worksite. He'll get himself into position to remove a cable to an EWIS antenna, which interferes with opening up our micrometeoroid orbital debris shield, MMOD shield. Meanwhile, Drew leaves the airlock and heads nadir on station to the port side of the lab, and then he translates forward along a set of handrails to meet up with Ricky. Once Drew's at the worksite, he makes his way up to a set of power cable connections, and he releases an IDA power cable. That IDA cable power hooks up to the high-def camera power, and then the high-def camera power cable hooks back up onto the panel. The ends of that wire are wire-tied to a handrail for restraint, and Ricky receives the power cable from Drew. And Ricky will begin translating and routing that cable over onto node 2 and then forward to the node 2 end cone. From there, the power cable wires off into two parts of the harness. One will go to worksite interface 16 and be wire-tied there. The other will be wire-tied near worksite interface 17. Meanwhile, Drew will be opening up the MMOD shield, disconnecting an Ethernet cable. He'll hook that cable up to our Ethernet cable, and he'll hook our Ethernet cable up to the panel. He'll close the MLI and the MMOD shield and reconnect the EWIS antenna. Once that's done, Drew will begin translating forward and meeting up with Ricky. He'll hand off the Ethernet cable, which wires off similar to the power cable. One end will be near WIF 16 and the other end will be near WIF 17. Both crew members will translate back to the airlock and they'll retrieve a boom with a high-def camera attached to it. From there, Ricky will move forward and Drew will move forward along separate paths. Once they're back on node 2, they'll install their booms into WIF 16 and WIF 17 respectively. They'll remove protective bags that are over the high-def cameras, and they'll remove lens covers, also to protect the cameras. The bags will be stowed out of the way, and each crew member will retrieve one of the power cables to hook up to each of the high-def cameras. Once the power cables are connected, each crew member will retrieve an end of the Ethernet cable and attach that to the camera as well. Ricky will make his way back to the airlock where he'll retrieve a large ORU bag and a PGT. He'll temporarily stow the ORU bag and retrieve an articulating portable foot restraint to install on the arm. Once he's on the arm will move him over to camera port 3, where he'll start working on the light. He'll disconnect a power cable and drive a bolt to remove that light. After that's stowed out of the way, he'll retrieve a new light and install that by driving a bolt and reattaching a power cable. The arm will position him to work on the high-def camera, where he'll release 2 power cables. He'll install a scoop and a lens protective cover, and he'll release the high-def camera. He'll slide it off of the stanchion and stow it out of the way and retrieve the replacement high-def camera. He'll slide this back into place. He'll remove the lens cover and the scoop, and he'll attach the power cables back to the high-def camera. Meanwhile, Drew is going to be retrieving an APFR and translating around to where he left the crew lock bag. He'll stow the crew lock bag on his foot restraint and make his way out onto the GEM exposed facility. Once he's at the work site, he'll install his foot restraint into a WIF and retrieve the crew lock bag. He'll ingress the foot restraint and position himself to work on the cat's aperture door. He'll inspect the work site, he'll practice closing the door, and then he'll try and restrain the door closed.
So I have today a mock-up that we had built in preparation for closing this door. We decided that we don't have a mock-up on the ground. What we need to do is find a way to practice closing this door, because it's not something that we practiced ahead of time. So we have this mock-up built. It's about 2.5 feet across. It has a hinge on one side and a latching mechanism on the other. It's covered in MLI. It actually hinges the way the real door does on board. What we'll do is we take this mock-up that we had built and we tried to think of different repair techniques, ways of closing it, ways of keeping it closed, so that when it does get put in SpaceX 17, it'll stay closed on the way in. We thought of a lot of different ways. People suggested that we use tape and strap tape across, but the problem is that we'll tape it closed and then we leave it exposed to space for a number of months, and that tape probably won't stay in place during that time, in which case they'd go to take it out and move it and the door may come open, and that would be problematic. So we have what are called wire ties, and it's just some copper wire that bends into shape. You may hear us talking about how we restrain cables, we restrain all kinds of items outside. It's a very, very simple piece of metal that's malleable that we move into shape, a lot of like it was designed kind of after the twist ties that you put on your bread wrapper. I think that's where the idea came from. So what we did is we decided we wanted something that we could use the features that are on the aperture door to try and wrap around and get some restraint. And the interesting thing is that inside there is a latch, but the latch was only there for keeping the door open during launch, and it's not there to keep it closed to come back home again. So we can use that feature by making our own sort of a pin latch out of the wire tie. And what we'll do is we'll have Drew open up the door and slide this wire tie into place. Then he'll push the door closed, and he'll use this little pin that we made to try and push in where the latch would normally go. And once that's in place and pulled kind of taut, this door won't open up, and it kind of holds it in place. But then how do you hold that that pin where the latch needs to go. So then we will take the wire tie and give it a good twist to kind of hold it in place, and that holds the pin where we want it to go. Then we'll take this long wire tie, sorry about that, Jordan, I'm about to poke you in the head there, buddy, and we'll pull it across the door. That also helps hold it down with this restraint here from opening up. And we'll use the hinge side to give it a good twist and pull it around, and that's how we plan to restrain the door. So I'd like to show the rest of the video, and then we can talk some more about it.
Once the door is restrained, Drew will egress the APFR, he'll stow the crew lock bag on the foot restraint, and he'll make his way back to the PMA to stow the foot restraint. After that, he'll make his way to the airlock. Meanwhile, Ricky will be cleaning up the arm by removing the articulating portable foot restraint, stowing it on the seater cart, and then retrieving the large ORU bag. Both crew members will meet back at the airlock. Drew will ingress first, followed by Ricky, and that will be the end of the EVA.
There we go, and that's the end of the EVA. That's such a cool technique. It's very simple, but it's very strategic on tying down that door especially. But for the cameras, looking out towards the forward end of the space station, not towards Node 2, that's where the international docking adapter is, and that's where commercial crew vehicles are going to go. So Kenny, looking forward at the commercial crew program, how is this going to sort of lead us exactly where we want to go?
Well, for the last, I would say, 2 years, we've been incrementally heading in the direction of change on board the space station. The docking adapter, as you say, the panels on the inside, rewired some of the stations. So we've been on a gradual path for the last couple of years, and these cameras that we're going to install are just yet another installment in that plan towards getting towards a fully commercial crew capable ISS. And so when we looked at some of the challenges with receiving vehicles on the front end of the station, part of that challenge is making sure that we have good cognizance of what's going on the other side of that Node 2 forward hatch, and we just didn't have good camera visibility. And as we worked with our commercial crew providers, it became apparent that we could gain a lot by having some cameras up there to give us some better insight, provide us a little bit of redundancy when it comes to having the crew be able to monitor these vehicles when they're coming in. So again, it's about improving our overall insight into these new vehicles that are coming to space station. So it's a very important capability for us.
Fantastic. A lot to look forward to for sure. So with that, we'll sort of open it up for questions for the remainder of our time today. I guess we'll start here in the room if anyone has some questions. Yes, sir. We'll give you the mic and then be on our way.
Ryan from KPRC TV here in Houston. Kenny, I guess for you, it's not just about cameras and not just about the commercial vehicles, but this is a big deal given this will be Americans launching Americans back into space. Kind of talk about the challenges of this. I mean, it's moving fast and you've got 2 vehicles.
Absolutely, and you know, anytime you try to link up 2 objects in low Earth orbit, there is a series of challenges that you have to deal with when doing that, and quite frankly, these are 2 new vehicles that bring in some new technology with them in terms of how they're doing business. It's been a long time since we've had a vehicle launching off American soil, bringing crews to the space station. So anyway, we're being very smart about it. We're doing everything we can to try to not only know those capabilities, but put things on space station that allow us to track these vehicles on the way in, so that we're all squared up with each other on how the vehicles are performing, and that the crew on board the International Space Station is getting the insight they need to know that these vehicles are coming in on the proper trajectories, and that all the right things have been considered. Absolutely.
Great. For those of you calling in, just make sure you press star 1 to make sure that your question is submitted, and we can read it aloud here in the room. With that, we'll actually move on. We're actually taking on social media, #AskNASA questions. So follow along on social media and ask your questions there. Let's see if we have any right now.
Yes, we do. Since we'll have a crew landing at the end of the month in May, so there'll be about 2 weeks when there's only 3 crew members on board. Dave Downing wants to know, if an EVA became necessary with only 3 crew members aboard, how would that be conducted?
The difference in this particular scenario, usually there is about a 2-week period where we have only 3 crew members. In this particular scenario, we're going to have about 4 or 5 days. The crew's coming home. Maker and Nemo and Anton are coming home on the 3rd of June, and then we'll follow that up with the launch on the 6th, a mere 3 days later, and then 2 days after that is when we'll see Serena and Alexander and Sergey on board. So we'll only have about a 4 or 5 day period. When you look at the way the systems are on board the station, we're in pretty good shape relative to the need to go out in that time frame. We feel pretty comfortable over a 4 or 5 day period. We're not going to have to rush out the hatch. So even on the day of departure, and we're down to 3 crew, we still have a little bit of runway. There are very few things that would drive us or drive the need to go out the hatch in that quick a time. So anyway, we feel very confident by the time that Serena and Anton get on board that we would be ready to go.
Another question was, how much time can the astronauts spend outside the ISS in a circumstance where they had to be out there for an extended period of time? What's the maximum length that they could be outside the ISS?
Well, it's different between our 2 EVAs. It's limited by consumables in the suit, and also how long of a day length that we have, and other factors like that. But what's interesting is that on the OA9 spacecraft, we're flying up new MEDOX canisters. They're what scrub the carbon dioxide out of the crew members' breathing oxygen. So we, on my EVA, get new or refurbished MEDOX canisters that will provide us quite a bit more capability than on Jordan's EVA. But it'll give us a minimum 6.5 hour EVA, but we'll have a longer capability on EVA 51.
In general, as we put together EVA plans, we assume 6.5 hours. That's what the team will go off and design an EVA. We won't put more content in there that we can get done in 6.5 hours. And then after that, it really is the ops team's discretion in terms of managing everything from crew fatigue to how the CO2 is being scrubbed, and you know, how the tasks are going on orbit. And there's a little bit of margin on the other side of 6.5 hours that we talk about before they go out the hatch, and talk through the planning for that extra little bit of margin. But in general, it's a 6.5 hour EVA with a little bit of margin to manage in real time.
Cool. I think we have a question in the room.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, how autonomous is the crew member during the EVA? Like, do they memorize a lot of it beforehand, or are you feeding a lot of it to them live time?
That's actually a really good question. Depending on the crew, they're going to spend quite a bit of time reading the procedures, getting comfortable with the procedures. It's like Anthony was talking about. We have crew conferences where they're able to ask questions about the procedures. But then we do have a ground IV that is essentially just walking through step by step as we get things accomplished. So they're able to move from location to location, and they get a pretty good big picture of where they're going for the entire day. But the step-by-step, there's a lot of safety checks that go on with making sure that we're restrained to hardware. The crew is always restrained to the vehicle, so there's a lot of checks that takes place there, and a lot of comm and back and forth between the ground team and the crew at the time.
And another thing is that they fly what's called a cuff checklist, and on the cuff checklist we have all the contingency procedures for the suit. But there are a few extra pages, so what we can do is we put special procedures that we have them print out and tape into that cuff checklist, and at certain points they're allowed to kind of act on their own. And a lot of times when one crew member is on the space station arm being maneuvered, they take up all the communication because we want to know exactly where they are and what maneuvers they're doing. So the other crew member can't really talk to the ground IV as much. So we would prefer that he have a set of instructions with him to go off and do on his own. So it's a little bit of give and take, but for the most part we want to keep control of what they're doing, and they want us to tell them what to do.
Great. All right, let's go back to social media to see if we can squeeze in one more question.
Yes, from Twitter. They want to know, the new HD cameras look like they will capture great views from the space station. Can you say any more about them and what they may look like and how the public will be able to view them?
Well, we have a couple of HD cameras on space station, several. We periodically on the NASA channel, they will show one of these cameras that are attached to our standard truss cameras. They'll actually have the external high definition camera on the side of it, and those views can be made available through the NASA channel. So that's always a good source. There's also on the Columbus, what we call the back porch, there's a high definition camera there that provides views all the time on the web. Actually, for that camera, I believe it's called HDEV, and so you can go there, and that's just constantly showing high definition views of the Earth and very spectacular images.
This might seem sort of apparent, but from an operations perspective, what's the benefit of using high definition versus standard definition?
You have a better insight into whatever you're looking at. You can use HD cameras for vehicle inspections to zoom in on parts that you're worried about, to get an overall view of if you're about to do some robotics, understanding what the work site looks like. Whereas with standard definition, you might be able to see that there was something clouding your work site that might get in your way. With an HD cam, you can zoom in and say, oh, there's a piece of multi-layer insulation that's in the way. I need to worry about that, and here's how I think I can get around it. So it gives you overall better situational awareness, which is something we absolutely love to have in the operations community.
Yeah, better information, better clarity for sure. All right, thank you so much for providing insight into these next EVAs that we're doing. A lot of work that sets us up for the future very well, and a lot of exciting opportunities ahead. So with that, we'll wrap up our coverage for the briefing today and look forward to the coverage of the EVAs themselves. Again, the first one is on May 16th, that's next week, and the following one on June 14th. On NASA TV, we're going to go live at 5:30 a.m. Central Time, looking to go out the hatch at 7:10 a.m. Central, and you can start tuning in for the 6.5-hour planned EVA. During the EVA coverage, we'll also be taking Ask NASA questions, so start sending those in and we'll collect them, see if we can read them out live during the briefing. So thanks to our briefers today for going over the EVA in detail and answering some great questions, giving us a good overall perspective of what we're doing and why it's important. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you for those next 2 EVAs.
And we see the enabled warning. We expect you in 2.1 of the emergency book.
Copy that. We'll put it in work.
Station Moscow on space to ground 1 regarding the smoke alarm signal. Go ahead. It's behind the panel 313 actually. No, 314 actually, that the sensor tripped because I'm finishing up with the Icarus experiment here. Okay, so it's the sensor fault. Well, of course, I have to close out to do the closeout steps of the Icarus payload. Copy. Oleg, what about CSACP readings? So you didn't use the analyzer to just make sure that everything is fine? Everything is fine, Sergey. All right. Copy, Oleg. Thank you.
Houston Station on 2, no visual or smelling indications, and CSAs are 0.
And we copy that. And there's a false fire. Thank you.
Copy that. And we're switching back over to 1, and then hopefully we'll get the DPC going here shortly.
Thank you.
Houston, Hanfield, Munich, Tsukuba in Moscow. Expedition 55 is ready for evening DPC.
And Station Houston, good evening. The plan is on board. We're all set to enjoy your Victory Day holiday tomorrow.
Copy that, Steve. And we are excited. We got our list of things to do all ramped up, and we're going to make some good use of the time.
Well, that's good, Scott, because the 3 iPads that are currently being updated, yours, Nemo's, and the Fit, are taking longer than expected. We will continue to update them tonight, and they should be ready by wake up in the morning, but they will need to stay plugged in for the update, so you won't be able to use yours tonight.
Okay, copy that, and we'll make sure they stay plugged in.
All right, we do have a question for you. Did you trash the portable fan assembly serial number 1025 as discussed this morning?
That's affirmative.
All right, well, that's good to know. And as the paper issue, as we understand it, the pages are sticking together due to the hole punches. Have you tried fanning the paper out and separating it before you insert it in the printer?
Affirmative, but it's so badly punched that we have to do every page individually, and we have to put it in between two flat things to flatten it out, and we're pulling paper out of all the devices and the paper holder and the rollers and stuff out of the printer because it's just tearing and it's all getting caught up in there.
Are you able to use the printer one page at a time?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so that's the only configuration that seems to be consistently working, I gather.
Well, it kind of depends. You know, if you get the paper at the beginning of the stack and it's not that bad, you can get 4, 5, 6 pages out before it jams and makes a mess. But if you're in the middle of the stack, then you won't get anything out unless you spend a lot of time flattening out the paper.
All right, we copy that. We don't really have any good answers for you right now, but there is new paper coming that's supposed to alleviate this issue up on OA9 in a couple weeks.
That is beautiful news. Thank you.